Hello and welcome to Alroy Reads. This is the show where every week I look at a book that inspired James Ellroy, moved James Ellroy, thrilled James Ellroy. And if you're a regular viewer, you know that every episode I usually begin with a little joke. But today I think I will begin with an announcement, and that is that I am writing a new book. I'm under contract to write this book, so it is real, it exists, it's going to happen, it's going to be published. And this book is about, well, it's no joke, let's put it that way. And today's episode is about a very classic book, The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background. Patricia Highsmith is one of the most revered crime writers in 20th century, not just American literature, but world literature, one of the all-time greats. She was born in Fort Worth, Texas. Her parents had differed over her birth. Her father actually had been dead set against children, and the mother had tried to induce abortion because the procedure was not legal at the time by drinking turpentine. Anyway, the birth went ahead. Her parents had split up, and she was her birth name is actually Mary Patricia Plangman. She grew up idolizing her mother and alternating between Fort Worth and New York, where the family lived. She detested her stepfather, although she took her name, and that's the name we know her today. But she took her stepfather's name, Highsmith, and Patricia Highsmith is how we know her today. Although she idolized her mother was extremely cruel to her and gave her many of the kind of abandonment issues and also kind of pessimism that runs throughout her work. Her mother really didn't like from a young age Patricia's tomboy personality and confronted her about being asking her if she's a lesbian when she was in her early teens. Patricia Highsmith was a gay woman. She had many relationships with women throughout her life. Most of them were a little bit self-destructive. It was much more difficult to be a gay man or a gay woman in mid-20th century America and Europe than it is today. She had relationships with married women, and she'd burned through them, and she never seemed to be able to settle for a life partner. But her writing career took off from an early age. She was a prodigious reader, and she began publishing short stories and also writing copy and writing for comic books, but she considered that hack work. But she hit the jackpot really with her first novel, Strangers on a Train, which set the basis for many of the psychological themes of her work. Um, Two men, they swap murders. It's an ingenious setup. It's a way that they won't be a trace because they don't know the other person's victim, and it's an absolutely brilliant novel. And it was filmed famously by Alfred Hitchcock. And Highsmith's work has been filmed many times throughout the decades. In fact, there are currently over 2 dozen film and television adaptations of her work, and I'm sure there will be many more. And while I'd recommend the film Strangers on the Train, I'd say read the book. And in fact, read all of her books because Hitchcock didn't quite capture, first of all, the same-sex sexuality between two men who are pulling off this crime and the attraction they have towards each other. Or, because the censorship at the time was more strict in film than it was in publishing, it doesn't get quite as twisted and as perverse as Highsmith's novel. She followed it up with a novel titled The Price of Salt, and that became part of the lesbian pulp fiction boom of the 1950s. Her publisher said, you must be crazy to want to write a lesbian novel after a huge success on Strangers on a Train. You should be following it up with more psychological fiction. But she was adamant. He published it under a pseudonym. It didn't do particularly well. It actually defied a lot of the censorship around lesbian pulp fiction at the time, because traditionally all of these books had to end with the gay women unhappy. They had to be punished, so to speak. And The Price of Salt doesn't have a tragic ending or a deeply unhappy ending. In fact, there's a kind of vindication of women's sexuality. And The Price of Salt did better in reprints throughout the years. It's finally been published under her own name, I believe, and again has been filmed as Carol with Kate Blanchett. And it's quite a good film adaptation. I think that's one of the best. Anyway, in 1955 came The Talented Mr. Ripley, and it is again a classic setup. You have our lead character, our hero, our anti-hero, I should say, Tom Ripley. He's getting by with small-time cons and confidence tricks in New York City. He's barely eking a living, and he stumbles across this rich businessman magnate type, Herbert Greenleaf, who says to him, "I want you to travel to Mongibello," which was Highsmith based on Positano in Italy. Highsmith spent a lot of time in her later years in Italy, France, England, and she actually died in Switzerland. So she knew Europe very well. Uh, I want you to go to Italy. My son, Dickie Greenleaf, I'm worried about him. He's immature. He's got this errant personality. I want you to keep an eye on him. So Ripley agrees, and he's just glad of the money, and he goes there. He meets Dickie. He meets Dickie's female friend Marge, and they enter this kind of weird love triangle. It's not necessarily consummated, but at first, at least, but psychologically, it's there. They're living this kind of playboy, idle rich lifestyle in Italy. But Rob, like a pen to play, the unwelcome guest, the uninvited guest, challenges the status quo, and Marge becomes very, very jealous of Tom and Dickie's relationship, and obviously there's hints of homoerotica with Tom. Well, Ripley, I should say, Ripley trying on Dickie's clothes, impersonating, dancing around. It's a very famous scene now. And again, another character comes into the mix to challenge it again. Dickie's friend, Freddie Miles, who comes along and begins to really suspect Ripley. And Ripley hates Freddie because Freddie is a threat to him, taking Dickie away from him. So there's constant jockeying between the characters. And I'm not sure how much more I should say plot-wise, because I'm taking you right to the point where something kind of explosive happens. But let's just say, Highsmith, really pays off the story. You have assumed identities. You have murder. You have fugitives on the run. You have everything you want in a kind of psychological suspense story, and it keeps you guessing right until the very last page, and which is absolutely delightful. And Highsmith followed it up with 4 more Tom Ripley novels, and he became the character she is most closely associated with. They're all good, but I still think The Talented Mr. Ripley is the best, and it's definitely the most classic, most canonical novel that she wrote. She wrote, many fine novels, The Cry of the Owl, and several more. An expert, 22 novels in total. And James Ellroy has always spoke very, very highly of Patricia Highsmith. And when he was doing his film series, which was the overall film series was called In a Lonely Night, in Denver, where he's living now, he actually put on Purple Noon, which was the first adaptation of The Talented Mr. Ripley, or the first Ripley film. And that starred Alan Delon as Ripley, and that's just an iconic film. It's absolutely brilliant. And Alroy said it's his favorite film adaptation. It's the best film adaptation, and it is really, really astonishingly good. And he said that it does justice to the novel. It does change the ending, or at least it kind of hints at a different ending, and Highsmith disliked that because she thought it was too moralistic. Since then, there have been many more on-screen Ripleys. He was played by Dennis Hopper in The American Friend. He was famously played by Matt Damon in The Talented Mr Ripley, and the copy I'm holding up here is a film movie tie-in. In fact, even the blurb at the top is talking more about the movie than it is about the film. And The Talented Mr Ripley kind of got mixed reviews at the time, but I think it holds up quite well. Matt Damon was a pretty good Ripley. And since then, we've had John Malkovich, and if any actor was born to play Tom Ripley, I'd say it was John Malkovich. And was an American actor. I think it's Barry Pepper. That was an interesting little film, low budget, bit more blackly comic. It was filmed on the Isle of Man, but and then recently we've had a massive Netflix series with Andrew Scott, which I thought was a bit drawn out. But Andrew Scott, again, another actor I think was born to play Ripley. There aren't that many firm links between Alroy and Highsmith, because most of the books I cover on this show, Alroy has met many of the authors and is friends with the authors and has actually helped their career. That was well, definitely not the case with Alroy and Highsmith. And in fact, when Highsmith died in 1995 of lung cancer, she had a lot of health problems. Alfred A. Knopf refused to publish her last novel. And by this time, Alroy was an Alfred A. Knopf author, and he was at the height. 1995 was American tabloid, so he was at the beginning, but also like the height of his ascendancy with Alfred A. Knopf, which was very, very important to him. One more firm link between Alroy and Highsmith is the editor Otto Penzler. Now, Otto Penzler played a big role, not just in his friendship with Alroy, but also rescuing his career in the 1980s when Alroy had hit a rough patch, and helping him to develop his voice. Penzler published 7 of Highsmith's novels and knew her very, very well. It's probably fair to say they were friends, but it was a difficult relationship. Highsmith, particularly towards the end of her life, had become an anti-Semite. She'd become anti-black. She'd just become a bigot, and she wanted to dedicate one of her novels to the Palestinian cause, and Penzler quashed that, and she really, really had a massive go at him. And Penzler subsequently told Highsmith's biographer she was mean, she was nasty, she was cruel. I'll never understand how a human being can be that cruel. And who knows, if Highsmith was around today, no doubt there'd be calls for cancel culture and for her to be cancelled. But that's not how readers and fans will want to remember her, of course. We'll want to remember her as not just a brilliant author of psychological thrillers, but also as a trailblazer in terms of as a gay woman who lived fairly openly and was just ahead of her time, and unlike many authors, was just unable to settle down. Perhaps part of her feared that and always sought out the inappropriate partners because she thought maybe it represented a threat to her writing career. And so the books is how we want to remember her, and The Talented Mr. Ripley is one of the all-time classic novels, and it's one of the all-time great anti-heroes. And one more link between Alroy and Highsmith. Let me ask you a question. Who is your favourite James Ellroy character? What's that? Dudley Smith? Yes, mine too. Yeah, Dudley Smith is probably the greatest Alroy character. And even people who haven't read Alroy probably have heard him in the popular culture. Dudley Smith, this great cop who is also a Machiavellian criminal. And in many ways, you get where I'm heading with this. A Ripley. Dudley Smith is a Ripley. He is that wonderfully attractive but evil character who Alroy is most closely associated with. I'm not saying by any stretch of imagination is a carbon copy or that Alroy wrote Dudley with um, Ripley in mind, but I think some of the lessons of what Patricia Highsmith was able to do, Alroy has been able to take further and keep coming back to Dudley and back to Dudley because he just can't help himself. He's just that good a character. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. I'll see you next time for another episode of Alroy Reads. Okay, bye bye.